It was an ordinary day at the museum, or so I thought. The never-ending task of archiving artifacts had turned into a monotonous routine over the years, but when I found the old satellite communication device, things took a chilling turn. You see, my job as an assistant curator wasn't exactly thrilling, mostly paperwork and cataloging ancient relics, but I never expected to find something like this, a relic of a different kind. A small device, worn from the desert winds, was nestled at the bottom of a box filled with records of an archaeology team that had vanished years ago. There was something unsettling about the device from the moment I touched it, as if it held memories better left forgotten, and in a way, it did. Inside were 22 logs recordings from the field team sent to investigate a previously unknown Mesopotamian ruin on the outskirts of Jordan. This wasn't just another excavation. What they uncovered down there, no one was prepared for. I'll spare you the tedious details of how the device worked, but let's just say these recordings were never meant to be heard by the outside world. What I found on those logs, though, paints a different picture, a story lost to time, buried beneath sand and stone, waiting to be uncovered again. Now, I'll share what I can, but be warned, this story doesn't end where you think it does. The first log seemed innocuous enough, a bit of banter, some light-hearted excitement. The team, led by Carter, had just arrived at the site, their spirits high despite a sudden storm that had rolled in. History in the making, one of them joked, but it was the storm that was their first warning, one they failed to heed. As Carter's voice crackled over the recording, I could hear the wind howling in the background, the sound of distant thunder growing closer. They were stranded, unable to begin their work. Little did they know, that storm wasn't just a natural occurrence, it was the first sign that something ancient had awakened. The storm passed, but in its wake, it left something far more dangerous. Carter's voice was more serious now, the playful tone from the first log gone. A lightning strike had hit the excavation site directly, opening a massive crater. Beneath the surface, they found something no one had anticipated, a labyrinth of tunnels that led deep into the earth, untouched for centuries. It's man-made, Carter noted, the awe in his voice apparent, but there was something off. The architecture didn't match anything they had studied before. This wasn't Mesopotamian, this was older, far older. And as they ventured deeper into the tunnels, the recordings became more erratic, more chaotic. By the time I reached the fifth log, the team had gone much further than they intended. They had come across a doorknob, a wall. Carter corrected himself, with a grotesque face carved into it. The carving wasn't just decorative, it was angry, malevolent, as if it were a guardian meant to keep something inside. They debated what to do next. Some of the team suggested using dynamite to force it open, but Carter refused. Whatever was behind that wall, he knew it wasn't meant to be disturbed. Every brick is evidence of a lost civilization, he reminded them. But there was another reason he was hesitant. The air had grown heavier, the darkness in the tunnel pressing in on them, and there was a growing sense that they weren't alone. The seventh log marked the beginning of the real terror. Milo, one of the team members, was clearly shaken. He had seen someone emerge from the tunnel. He came out of nowhere, Milo insisted, his voice trembling. But there's no way he could have been inside. It's a dead end. Carter tried to reason with him, but it was clear Milo wasn't imagining things. Whoever or whatever had crawled out of that tunnel wasn't human, or at least not anymore. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the desert night. But the team wasn't ready to give up. They were scientists, driven by discovery, and despite the warnings, they pushed on. By the 10th log, things had escalated. The door, the one with the carved face, had opened on its own. No one knew how or why. Carter's voice was strained as he tried to keep his team calm, but fear was creeping in. The tunnel system went deeper than they had thought, much deeper. Strange symbols lined the walls, languages that none of them could recognize. "This isn't on any of our records," Carter muttered. As they ventured further into the dark, the air grew thicker with the stench of rot, and the carvings became more disturbing. "This place wasn't meant to be found," one of them whispered, but by then, it was too late. The final log was barely intelligible, filled with static and muffled voices. But there were screams loud, piercing, and filled with terror. Something had gone horribly wrong. Carter's voice cut through the noise. "Get out. Get out now." But there was no escape. Whatever they had uncovered beneath the sands had awakened, and it wasn't going to let them leave. The last thing I heard before the recording cut out was a deep, guttural sound, something that didn't belong in this world. I don't know what happened to the archaeology team after that. Their bodies were never found, and the site was quietly shut down. Officially, the team was declared missing, presumed dead. But after hearing these recordings, I'm not so sure. Whatever they found down there is still waiting, buried beneath the desert sands. And now that the door has been opened, I fear it won't stay hidden for long. You may think this is just another forgotten archaeological dig, another mystery lost to time. But if you ever come across an ancient ruin, one with strange symbols and carvings of angry faces, turn around. Some things are meant to stay buried. It's been days since I listened to those recordings, and I can't get the sound of that final, guttural noise out of my head. It follows me, even when I'm at home. My dreams are filled with shifting sands and dark tunnels that go on forever, with faces carved into the walls, watching, waiting. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear whispering, but when I listen, it's nothing but the wind. I thought about going to my superiors with the recordings, but what would I even tell them? That a group of archaeologists were taken by something ancient and monstrous. They'd laugh me out of the museum. I considered sending the recordings to anyone, but something stops me every time I try. It's as if the device itself doesn't want to be shared, like it's guarding its own secrets. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but when I look at it, I swear the device feels heavier, more oppressive than it should. And then, last night, something happened. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard the first knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just a slow, deliberate tapping that echoed through the quiet of my apartment. At first, I thought it was a dream, one of those half-awake hallucinations that fade as soon as you open your eyes. But then it came again, 3 knocks, soft but persistent. I sat up in bed, the darkness pressing in around me, my heart pounding in my chest. I live alone. No one comes to visit me, especially not in the middle of the night. I waited, holding my breath, listening. Another knock, followed by silence. I slowly made my way to the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor or a random passerby. But as I reached for the doorknob, something stopped me. That same feeling from the recordings, the heaviness, the sense of being watched, it washed over me. My hand froze just inches from the knob. There was something on the other side of the door. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. The air felt thick, like the tunnels in the recordings. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear, but all I could make out was a faint rustling, like the sound of sand shifting in the wind. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't until the next morning that I found the footprints. When the sun finally came up, I opened the door, half expecting to find nothing. But there, just outside my apartment, was a trail of footprints leading down the hallway. They weren't human. The prints were strange, wide, almost claw-like, with deep indentations in the carpet. I crouched down to examine them, and that's when I noticed something else. The air around the footprints was colder, unnaturally so, and as I moved closer, I felt a sharp chill run down my spine. The prints led away from my door, down the hall, and out of sight. I followed them for a while, but they disappeared at the end of the corridor, fading into nothing. No one else in the building seemed to have noticed them. When I asked my neighbors, they looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. Since that night, I found myself drawn back to the recordings, listening to them over and over, searching for something, anything that might explain what's happening. But each time I listen, I notice something new, something I hadn't caught before. Small details, like a whispered voice in the background, or the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. It's as if the recordings are changing, evolving. There's one log in particular that I keep coming back to, log 12. In it, Carter mentions a strange symbol they found etched into the tunnel wall, a spiral with jagged edges, unlike anything they'd seen before. He doesn't dwell on it, but something about the way he describes it sticks with me. I did some research, but I couldn't find any references to a symbol like that in Mesopotamian history. It's almost as if it doesn't belong to any known culture. I can't shake the feeling that the symbol holds the key to all of this. The deeper I dig, the more it consumes me. I've started sketching it over and over, filling pages with the same jagged spiral. Each time I draw it, I feel a strange sense of dread, like I'm opening a door that was never meant to be opened. Lately, my dreams have become more vivid, more real. I find myself back in those tunnels, walking through the darkness, the walls closing in around me. The air is thick, suffocating, and the smell of rot is everywhere. In the distance, I hear that same guttural sound, growing closer with each step. Last night, the dream was different. I wasn't alone this time. I saw them, Carter, Milo, the rest of the team standing in the shadows, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. They were waiting for me, beckoning me to join them. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was trapped, the darkness swallowing me whole. And then I woke up, the spiral symbol burning in my mind. I've made a decision. I'm going back to the site. I know it's dangerous. I know I shouldn't, but I need answers. The recordings, the footprints, the dreams, it's all connected. Whatever they found down there, it's calling to me, and I can't ignore it any longer. I've already booked my flight to Jordan. I don't know what I'll find when I get there, but I have to know the truth. Maybe I'm walking into my own destruction. Maybe I'm already too far gone. But some part of me believes that if I can just uncover what really happened, I'll finally be free of this curse. If you're reading this, and I don't come back, don't follow me. Whatever is beneath the sands, it's not meant for the living. Let it stay buried. Some doors should never be opened. 2 weeks later, an anonymous tip led local authorities to an abandoned excavation site in the Jordanian desert. The remains of a man were found near a collapsed tunnel, clutching a worn-out satellite communication device. The recordings on the device, though heavily degraded, were similar to those previously recovered from the vanished archaeological team. No one knows how the man got there, or why he was drawn to the site. But one thing is clear: he wasn't alone. The desert keeps its secrets well, and sometimes those who seek them never return. Months passed since the authorities discovered the remains, yet rumors spread far beyond the dusty boundaries of the excavation site. Locals whispered about strange lights in the desert, mysterious winds that carried voices, and nights when the sand itself seemed to shift unnaturally, like it was alive. The Bedouins, who had always respected the desert's ancient mysteries, began to avoid the area altogether. They spoke of a curse, of a darkness that had been unearthed. Old tales were resurrected stories of the desert wind, an ancient force that, once disturbed, would claim all who ventured into its domain. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as myths, but now, fear was growing again. Something had awakened. Despite the growing unease, curiosity from the academic world was insatiable. The recordings, although heavily degraded, had leaked into academic circles. The discovery of the spiral symbol, mentioned in Carter's log, caught the attention of scholars and occult researchers alike. Speculation was rampant. Was this an unknown Mesopotamian deity? A forgotten cult, or something older, darker? A new expedition was proposed, this time funded by a private corporation with deep pockets and questionable motives. The company promised advanced technology and safety measures to prevent another tragedy, but their real goal was never fully disclosed. Whispers of hidden treasures, secret relics, and forbidden knowledge fueled their determination. A team of 12 was assembled: scientists, archaeologists, engineers, and mercenaries. Unlike the first group, these individuals were prepared for the worst, armed with cutting-edge equipment, weapons, and tools to navigate the treacherous tunnels. But there was one member of the team who remained an enigma, a man with no background, no clear expertise, and eyes that seemed to reflect the darkness of the desert itself. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were cryptic, his voice low and unsettling. The new team arrived at the site in the dead of night, the desert illuminated by a full moon. As they prepared to enter the tunnels, the wind picked up, swirling the sand around them in a chaotic dance. The Bedouins had warned them not to enter during a full moon, claiming it was when the desert wind was at its strongest, but they pressed on undeterred. As they descended, the familiar oppressive atmosphere from the previous recordings returned. The air grew colder, and the deeper they went, the more they felt an inexplicable weight pressing down on them. The walls of the tunnel seemed to hum, vibrating with some unseen force. Strange symbols, like the spiral described by Carter, appeared on the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light of their lanterns. At first, everything was calm. The team found remnants of the first expedition tools, abandoned equipment, and the collapsed passage where the bodies were discovered. But as they ventured deeper, the tunnel took on a life of its own. The walls began to shift subtly, as though the structure was alive, pulsing with energy. The temperature fluctuated wildly. One moment, it was freezing cold, the next suffocatingly hot. The strange man in the group, the Enigma, seemed unaffected. His eyes remained locked on the darkness ahead, almost as if he knew where he was going. It started with a scream. One of the engineers, stationed near the entrance to monitor the equipment, suddenly cried out, his voice echoing through the narrow tunnels. When the others reached him, they found him convulsing on the ground, his eyes wide with terror. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over, "It's watching, it's watching." His condition deteriorated rapidly. The medic in the group tried to calm him, but within minutes, the engineer was gone, his body cold, his skin pale, as if all the life had been drained from him. Panic began to spread through the group. Some wanted to leave immediately, but the company's representative, the Enigma, insisted they continue. "We are close," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "We cannot turn back now." Deeper still, the group stumbled upon something that hadn't been mentioned in any of the previous reports, a massive chamber, unlike anything they'd seen before. The walls were covered in carvings, faces, twisted and contorted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. The air was thick with an overwhelming stench of decay. At the center of the chamber stood a large stone pillar, and on it, the spiral symbol etched deep into the rock, glowing with an unnatural light. It seemed to pulse, as if alive, drawing them toward it. The moment they stepped into the chamber, the walls seemed to close in around them. The faces in the carvings began to shift, their eyes following the group as they moved. One by one, the team members started hearing things: whispers, footsteps, faint cries for help. The medic swore he saw shadows moving just out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned, there was nothing. The spiral on the pillar seemed to grow brighter, its glow intensifying with each passing second. And then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The Enigma walked straight to the pillar, his eyes locked on the spiral. As he approached, the tremors grew stronger, and the whispers in the air became deafening, like a chorus of tortured souls crying out from beyond. The team pleaded with him to stop, but he ignored them. He placed his hand on the spiral, and the moment he did, the chamber erupted with energy. The walls began to shake violently, and the faces in the carvings came to life, their mouths opening wide, releasing a cacophony of screams. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and from the fissures, a thick, black mist began to rise. The team tried to flee, but the mist was relentless. It moved with unnatural speed, engulfing them one by one. As the darkness closed in, they felt their minds slipping, their thoughts consumed by terror. The mist wasn't just a physical entity, it was something more. It was alive, and it fed on their fear, their memories, their very souls. In the midst of the chaos, the Enigma stood motionless, his hands still on the spiral. His eyes glowed with the same eerie light, and a sinister smile crept across his face. It was then that the others realized he had never been one of them. He had been waiting for this moment, guiding them to their doom. As the last of the team was consumed by the mist, the chamber fell silent. The spiral pulsed one final time before dimming, and the Enigma disappeared into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but the empty, lifeless faces etched into the walls. The desert swallowed the expedition whole. No one ever heard from them again, and the site was quietly abandoned, buried once more beneath the shifting sands. But the stories persisted. Locals spoke of cursed ruins, of strange symbols that glowed in the night, and of a man with glowing eyes who wandered the desert, always searching for the next soul to claim. And sometimes, on nights when the wind howled through the dunes, travelers swore they could hear the faint sound of whispers like the voices of those long lost, calling out from the depths of the earth, warning anyone who dared to listen. Years passed, but the desert never forgot. The ruins became a place of legend, avoided by even the bravest souls. Academics, treasure hunters, and thrill seekers all fell silent when the subject arose. The whispers of the desert wind persisted, carried by the sandstorms that occasionally swept across the land. People claimed they saw shadowy figures on the dunes, silent watchers who seemed to vanish when approached. The corporation that had funded the second expedition quietly dissolved, leaving no trace of its involvement, as if trying to erase all memory of what had happened. Official records were altered, reports redacted, and those involved disappeared without a word. But rumors leaked whispers of strange experiments, of otherworldly forces beyond human understanding. Some said that the enigma, the mysterious man who had led the second group, was still out there, wandering the desert like an ancient, cursed soul. One night, many years later, a lone figure approached the ruins under a moonless sky. Wrapped in a cloak to shield themselves from the harsh winds, they moved with purpose, ignoring the warnings of the locals and the stories that had terrified so many before. Their face was hidden in the shadows, but their eyes burned with a single, unshakable determination to uncover the truth. They entered the tunnels, following the path that the previous expeditions had taken, deeper into the earth. The carvings on the walls were still there, the faces frozen in eternal agony, their eyes following the intruder's every move. But this time, there were no tremors, no whispers, only silence. The pilgrim continued until they reached the great chamber, the Hall of Faces, with its massive pillar and the spiral symbol etched deep into the stone. But something had changed. The spiral no longer glowed with its eerie light. The chamber was cold, lifeless, as though the energy that once coursed through it had been drained. The pilgrim approached the pillar cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the vast, empty room. They reached out, placing their hand on the spiral, just as the enigma had done all those years ago. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the darkness stirred. The mist began to rise once again, but this time it was different. It moved more slowly, curling around the pilgrim like a serpent. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, swallowing the dim light of the lantern. The pilgrim stood still, unafraid, as the mist enveloped them completely. In the silence, a voice whispered, a familiar voice, one that had echoed through the tunnels long ago. "You were warned," it said softly. "The spiral is eternal. You cannot escape its pull." The pilgrim smiled. "I'm not here to escape," they whispered in return. "I'm here to join it." In that moment, the spiral on the pillar flared to life, brighter and more intense than ever before. The walls of the chamber groaned, and the faces in the carvings began to shift once more. But this time, there was no fear, no panic. The pilgrim's eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the enigmas once had. They had become part of the spiral, another link in the endless chain, a soul willingly given, not taken. The chamber's energy surged, and the darkness itself seemed to shudder in response. The mist receded, and the chamber fell silent once more. The spiral dimmed, but its power remained, waiting for the next to come, the next soul to join its eternal dance. The desert continues to whisper its secrets. Travelers still speak of strange lights in the distance, and the occasional figure wandering the dunes, eyes glowing in the night. Some say the desert wind calls out to them, beckoning them to follow, to descend into the ruins and join the spiral. But those who have heard the stories know better. They know that the spiral never ends, that once it has touched you, it will never let you go. And so, the legend grows, passed down through the generations. The spiral waits, patient and eternal, for the next soul to answer its call. For in the end, All who enter the spiral become part of it.